Adam Smith was a professor of moral philosophy, and the first book he wrote was on morality. Thus, it might be very interesting to explore his philosophical leanings. In addition, there's been an attempt to suggest that economics is a science devoid of philosophical leanings. COVID, global warming, and other areas of so-called science we've seen in recent decades are highly influenced by the philosophical leanings of those people pushing this so-called areas of science. Thus, I think it's important to explore the philosophical leanings of great economists in history. Before we investigate Adam Smith's philosophical leanings, here's a short biography about him.
Historic figures everyone should know. By history as biography. Adam Smith was a Scottish economist and philosopher who is considered to be the father of modern economics. He is best known for his book, The Wealth of Nations, which was published in 1776. This book is considered to be a cornerstone of modern economics, and it has had a profound influence on the development of economic thought. Smith was born in 1723 in Kirkcaldy, Scotland. He studied at the University of Glasgow, where he was influenced by the ideas of philosophers such as Francis Hutcheson and David Hume. After completing his studies, Smith became a professor of moral philosophy at the University of Glasgow. In The Wealth of Nations, Smith argued that the pursuit of self-interest is the driving force behind economic activity. He believed that the invisible hand of the market, which is the force that guides individuals to act in their own self-interest, leads to the production of goods and services that are beneficial to society as a whole. Smith believed that competition in the market leads to greater efficiency and innovation, and he argued that government intervention in the economy should be minimal. Smith also believed in the importance of free trade, and he argued that countries should not protect their domestic industries through tariffs and other trade barriers. Instead, he believed that countries should specialize in the production of goods and services in which they have a comparative advantage, and trade with other countries to obtain goods and services that they cannot produce efficiently themselves. In addition to his work on economics, Smith also made important contributions to the fields of moral philosophy and political theory. In his book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, he argued that humans are naturally inclined to be sympathetic and empathetic, and that this sense of moral sentiment is the basis for human social interactions. Smith's ideas have had a lasting impact on the world of economics, and his work is still widely studied and debated today. His ideas about the role of the market and the pursuit of self-interest continue to shape economic policy and debate, and his concept of the invisible hand has become a central tenet of modern economics.
The fact that Adam Smith was friends with Francis Hutcheson and David Hume places him squarely in the Scottish Enlightenment tradition. Scottish Enlightenment tradition philosophically was based mainly on the idea of moral sentiments, or moral sense. This is the idea that morality is shaped by social norms and feelings, and reason can't be a guide to morality. In fact, it shows a skepticism of reason generally. Here's a clip that explains this idea.
Hi, I'm James Otteson, Professor of Economics at Wake Forest University. This video, part of the Fraser Institute's series on the key ideas of Adam Smith, focuses on morality, the primary subject of Smith's first published book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. Smith was interested in understanding how individuals come to decide what is right and wrong. Building on the work of contemporaries, such as David Hume, Smith developed a theory of morality that wasn't directly reliant on God or religion, which was the dominant view at the time. According to Smith, our sense of right and wrong, or our moral sentiments, develop over time as people interact with one another, and discover what works and what doesn't work, what is approved by others and what not. Smith coupled this view of emergent morals with a key insight, that people naturally desire to see themselves and to be seen by others as morally accountable beings. And to achieve this, people must act within the generally accepted norms or morality of society. Smith also envisioned an internal role, similar to what we now call a conscience. This role, what Smith called the impartial spectator, was seen as central to human behavior, informing us of how other people will interpret our behavior, and guiding us to make moral choices. Let's use a modern example to understand Smith's concept of morality. After cell phones hit the market, it remained acceptable for years for people to talk on the phone in their cars. However, as cell phones became more popular, it became apparent that using one while driving endangered both the driver and others on the road, including pedestrians. The views of people began to change. Eventually, the use of cell phones while driving was seen as a moral bad. This change in our social norms, or morality, drove the change in cell phone use, long before government legislation was introduced.
What's interesting about the professor's modern example is it basically is utilitarianism along with consensus. And the recent example of COVID shows exactly how this can go wrong. We were all supposed to go along with the consensus that this wasn't a bioweapon when it clearly was, and that the vaccines were safe and effective, and we should all take these vaccines for utilitarian reasons. Note that Adam Smith was skeptical of the power of reason, which is the only way we found out this was all lies and nonsense. Before we investigate how any of this relates to Adam Smith's ideas on economics, I would like to point out that Adam Smith was also very close friends with David Hume. In fact, they agreed to finish each other's work if the other one died first. Hume not only gave us the is-ought problem, but he was skeptical that there was cause and effect. He said, all we can say is that one thing follows another. Hume completely undermined reason. In fact, he denied the law of identity. And from my perspective, he was the first of the anti-Enlightenment philosophers, which then leads to Kant and to Edmund Burke and other anti-reason people like Marx. But how does this relate to Adam Smith's ideas on economics? I think it's clear from this that the famous quote from Adam Smith from The Wealth of Nations, quote, "It's not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from the regard to their own interest," is not a statement of rational self-interest as most people think. In fact, Smith thinks that reason only plays a secondary role, perhaps in helping people understand and reflect on their emotions and actions. In order to understand what Smith means by this quote, I think we need to look at his definition of economics. He writes, "Political economy, considered as a branch of the science of a statesman or legislator, proposes two distinct objects. First, to provide a plentiful revenue or subsistence for the people, or more properly, to enable them to provide such a revenue or subsistence for themselves. And secondly, to supply the state or the commonwealth with a revenue sufficient for the public services. It proposes to enrich both people and the sovereign." From this, I think this point about the benevolence of the butcher and the baker, and so on, and the invisible hand, is that the legislator, the government, doesn't need to involve itself in regulating this activity. This is what later scholars would call a self-organizing principle. So Smith's famous statement about the benevolence of the butcher and the baker is probably not a statement of rational self-interest. In fact, as one author said, it seems to be widely thought that Smith is all about self-interest. But is he really? If we search for self-interest in The Wealth of Nations, we might be surprised. We find all sorts of interests: public interest, private interest, own interest, interest in something. We find several mentions of rates of interest, but self-interest is mentioned only once. But let's look at his philosophy more systematically. I think we can say that both Smith's epistemology and his ethics are essentially defined by Hayek's cultural evolution, which can be summarized as rules, norms, and practices evolve in a process of natural selection operating at the level of the group. Thus, groups that happen to have more efficient rules and practices tend to grow and multiply, and ultimately displace other groups. By definition, this means that Smith's epistemology and ethics are essentially socialist, or group level, This is epistemological and moral subjectivism. And when it comes to political philosophy, it doesn't appear that Smith subscribes to the idea of the three fundamental rights of life, liberty, and property either. He writes on page 590 of Wealth of Nations that there are times that it's necessary to sacrifice the interests and the rights of a private man. He suggests that all that's necessary for justice is that the executive and judicial power be separated from each other. But is Adam Smith a paragon of capitalism? Well, Smith defines three duties for government. First duty is protect against foreign invaders. Second duty is the judicial system. The third duty is, quote, that of erecting and maintaining those public institutions and those public works which, though they may be in the highest degree advantageous to a great society, are, however, of such a nature that the profit could never repay the expense to any individual or small number of individuals, and which it therefore cannot be expected that any individual or small number of individuals will erect and maintain. I think it's clear from this that Adam Smith is clearly no minarchist. Smith is also not against government regulation. For instance, he wants the regulation of monopolies, which, by the way, he is okay with the government granting monopolies in certain instances. He does warn that regulations can stifle innovation and the economy, but he's not against regulation in general. So I think Smith would never have said, "We come here to end the state," as Millay did in one of his speeches. I also don't believe that Millay's epistemology and his morality are consistent with Adam Smith's. And I side with Millay. Long live freedom, damn it.